Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about sustaining creativity and innovation in indie games. So, indie game development often thrives on the balance between iteration and long-term sustainability. But in doing so, there's always the potential risk of burning out. So today, we're going to explore strategies on how to maintain creativity over time and how to adapt your development process to evolve projects while fostering innovation and sustainability. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with this, I have Tyler Glaiel with us. And am I saying your last name correctly? Because I forgot to ask you that pre-recording.
Yeah, close enough. Glaiel.
Glaiel. Okay, excellent. Tyler
Yeah.
Glaiel, folks, with us today. And, Tyler, I mean, how's it going? Really appreciate you being here on the show with us.
It's going pretty good.
Awesome. Always love hearing it. And folks, for those of
Yep.
you who aren't familiar with Tyler, he's a programming game designer of all things, as part of Glaiel Games, which kind of makes sense. And, the creator of games such as like Closure, Bomber Knots, rather, apologize. The End is Nigh. And you have a really cool game in production now. And there's well, first though, there's so many other titles that you have released, some collaborations, all exciting stuff. I'm sure we'll get into some of those. But one in particular that's really exciting right now is one that you currently have in development, which is Mugenics. So if you don't mind, take a little time to share that and what's going on there.
So Mugenics is a game about breeding cats and taking them on adventures. And yeah, it's been in development for a while now. We've been working on it in its current form since early 2020, like January 2020, what I mean. So, and it'll come out next year. So it'll be, like 5 years of development by the time it comes out, plus years before that of like brainstorming and pre-production. But yeah, it's a monster of a game, starting out very well.
Excellent.
It's very fun. So many things to do. It's huge. Check it out.
Awesome. And so it also sounds like too, I mean, maybe this is hopefully not in poor taste or just maybe a bad effort and a joke, but it sounds like it's almost a COVID baby in a sense. I mean, you said January 2022 since it's been in development, and was it a fact of just having more time and focus, or this was just the next thing that was in the pipeline?
Oh, it worked. January was before COVID.
But right, it was before, but then shortly after, like, boom, everything was done. I remember specifically for a significant event that happened in my life then, but yeah, it's so not a direct result of that, but it just happened during that process or during that.
It just happened during that. I mean, we were pushing through it during COVID. It wasn't. I'm working on it with Edmund McMillan. The original, like, Mugenics was announced in like 2014 as like the follow up to Super Meat.
Okay, yep.
And it got canceled. And then we revived it again after we got the rights back to it. So it's always a game that we wanted to finish at some point or start over and make properly at some point. And we were playing around with it in 2018 and 2019 with some like smaller prototypes and stuff. But it wasn't until 2020 that we figured out, this is what the game actually is, and this is what we have to work on. Yeah. And that's when we started working on it in 2020. And then the pandemic immediately happens. And that was not a good thing for the development of the game. Like, without the pandemic, it would have been done probably a year faster. So
yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I'm sure that threw off a lot of things, but the important thing is, I mean, it's been quite a journey. It's getting done, and we're going to talk about a little bit more too. So it's really exciting to just probably learn about that a little bit too, because it's been a long time coming, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I mean, in addition to some of those games I shared, folks, I mean, these are nothing short of like awesomeness to it. I mean, and just to call out some a while back, Closure actually received the Indiecade Gameplay Innovation Award. and then there's the IGF excellence in audio foreclosure as well. And then at one point, you were even within the games industry, got the recognition of Forbes 30 under 30. I mean, just from a lot of the work that you've been doing and accomplishments with game development and stuff, lots of really cool stuff. And I mean, you even do kind of your public duty in some cases, as you say, serves as a jury member for the Innovation Award for IGF. So lots of cool things that you have been doing and doing up until this point. So, when you're not busy working on games, though, man, I'm curious to know what are you doing in your free time in terms of like to unplug or relax or anything else, anything that stands out that you really try to do to enjoy yourself on your off time.
Well, obviously, I play multiplayer games a lot, board games as well with friends. I cook food a decent amount these days. I have a 3D printer, and I've been like printing a bunch of like gears and things.
Oh,
So
all right, nice,
yeah, there's a bunch of things like that.
sweet, I love it. Yeah,
Yeah,
the 3D
tinker
printing,
with
it's
things.
my kids recently are like, "Hey, I want this 3D printed stuff." And wait, wouldn't it make sense to get a 3D printer? I'm like, no, not in our case, guys. But yeah, lots of
Yeah, I
interesting
mean,
things that could be made. And you were showing, you said like gears and like really interesting like parts and such, right? Yeah.
I didn't design this thing. I just saw something cool online, and I'm like, I want one of those. Oh, I can just print it.
Bam, send it off to the printer.
Yeah,
It's funny how you can
send it
do
off
that.
to the
Like
printer.
that.
Yeah,
Love it.
it's pretty cool.
Sweet. Well, hey man, thanks for
They're,
sharing.
they,
Yeah.
yeah, they're pretty cheap these days.
Oh yeah.
The 3D
No,
printers.
I remember when
Yeah,
they first came out. It was a bit ridiculous, but now totally accessible in so many possibilities too. So, well, thanks for sharing that stuff. And you know what? Before we get into our conversation for today, I kind of want to dive a little deeper in terms of getting to know you, and we're gonna do that with the Q Box round. And folks, for those of you who aren't familiar, the Q Box is just a few random questions I prepared for Tyler here today. So, Tyler, are you ready for the Q Box round?
sure.
Love it. All right. First one is, what's one habit you do to keep a clear and healthy mind?
So I think this is probably more than just an icebreaker answer, but when I'm working on stuff, I'm paying attention to how productive I'm. And
Ah, okay.
if I feel myself like not being productive, instead of just trying to like plow through it, I will just take a break.
That's
Like,
really good though. Keep going.
yeah. So, because like you can get trapped in a this like cycle where you're like staring at your like code file on the computer, like you have all your work stuff open, you're staring at it and not getting anything done. And you do that for the whole day, and it still feels like you were at work for the whole day, but you didn't get anything done. And like that's bad. That's not good. So I try to recognize if that's happening and then just not work for the day. Like I'm not going to get anything done this day anyway. I'm not going to work today. Close out all the work windows and then refresh and make up for it the next day or whatever.
Yeah.
I feel like that is fairly important for like long term, not burning out completely and keeping the productivity up over the long term.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, that whole component about it being introspective about like, the quality of your work and the efficiency of it. Cause it's like, if you're not like you said, it's not good. You're in. It's something else that happens too that I call out to, that it's like, you know how people complain like, man, I was so busy today, but yet I felt like I did nothing. It's like
Yeah, they
that's
probably
never
did do
good.
nothing. It's
Right.
not good.
Yeah,
You felt
exactly.
you've drained yourself the same you would as if you were getting stuff done and you didn't get anything done.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Right. All
yeah,
right, cool. All right, next
yeah.
one. And hey, this could relate. We'll see. But what's your main approach to tackling problems?
So there's a few ways to approach this because like I'm a programmer, so tackling problems in programming is like its own thing. But for that, I try to I think them through. I'm usually thinking through the problems if I'm not working as well. It's That's not the best, but I can't help myself. Um, So you think them through, and then at some point you just have to stop thinking and write the code, solve the problem in any way possible, and see, and then go from there. Basically, like doesn't matter if you did it correctly or incorrectly. You just get something down. There's like a temporary fix, and if it's good enough, then it's good enough, and if it's not good enough, then you can work on it a little. But like the quicker you get something working, the better, basically.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, if you're always kind of like overanalyzing, overthinking, and or even getting to a point of like, hey, this needs to be perfect for it to like work or well, that if you think of it, that's almost like creating limitations for yourself. So just by getting it
Yeah,
done and pushing through
easy
it,
to get
yeah,
caught up in theoreticals. Um, so that's one part. The other part is that I also try very hard to not just solve like the symptoms of a problem and try and figure out what the actual like root underlying cause or thing is, and make sure that I understand what the problem was and what the fix is correctly and fully. This is more important than just getting the fix on paper, but if I can understand it, then I want to understand it.
yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. I was just doing a talk recently that addressed the same thing in a different context, but it's like, hey, look, there's symptoms for everything. Like look at if you get sick, your symptoms are probably really close to some things that are really horrifying and things that are nothing. But until you understand the root cause, then you can't just throw pills at the problem, right? A similar situation.
Yeah,
Analogy applies across the board, I'm sure, with any
exactly.
type of thing.
Yeah, that's why like it's like programming is all about solving problems, but all that type of stuff applies. It's an easy analogy for a lot of things, but it applies to everything.
Absolutely. I love it. All
Yeah,
right. And last but not least, and the staple here on the show, folks, is what game are you playing now?
I've been very into a Deadlock recently. So
Nice.
that Valve one that's in development that is in like a pre-alpha state right now, but like not really because they have people playing it.
Yep.
But it's very addicting. It's very fun.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much for sharing that insight and what you're involved with. So now that we got through the cue box round, let's get into our conversation. And the topic for today, folks, is sustaining creativity and innovation, especially as it relates to indie games. Because I mean, these are all important things that we need to do so we can thrive, so we can continue to do what we love doing. So let's kick it off with this, Tyler. You've had a long career that stretches, from the early days, all the way to Flash games. I mean, wow, that's in some ways
Yeah.
that's kind of taken us back a little bit. In particular, I know Flash games on Newgrounds, and then you also created some major indie titles as well too. So, with all that said, I mean, how has your approach to iteration evolved from kind of those early projects to now?
So like the Flash games, which a lot of those I just made was when I was a teenager, but I made a lot of them when I was a teenager. They didn't take that long to make. Like they were all most of them were done in a week or 2 weeks. There's a couple of exceptions, but that's kind of all you could really do for a Flash game. If you spend way too long on it, the rewards weren't really like there other than making something, which is a reward in itself. But I liked making a lot of things, and you don't really have a lot of time to iterate if you're spending 2 weeks making a game.
Mm,
So the iteration cycle for those games was sort of like a larger across everything kind of deal where I would make a game and it didn't matter if it had issues or it was like janky or wasn't fun. I would slap a title screen on it, slap a you win screen on it, and post it on Newgrounds, and then take all the lessons I learned from that game and put it into the next thing that I was making instead of trying to endlessly tweak the same thing over and over for a Flash game. And I think that was very very helpful for like the early stages of my career because I got a lot of reps in. I have like 50 games on my Newgrounds profile. Some of them are good. Not most of them are, but some of them are pretty good. Eventually, they eventually figured out how all this stuff works and fits together. And yeah, so that was like that's one part for iterating. I think this is a long answer because there's two like stages.
Yeah, yeah, of
There's
course.
the like learning how to do the thing, and then there's making something big with all the knowledge you've acquired. So then I'm just going to skip over Closure and Bombernauts and go
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
Eugenics, the one I'm working on now, because it's, in my mind and fresh. But the iteration on this is, this is a long-term project. Like this is going to take about 5 years of development overall. And that is longer than basically all of my Flash games combined, because I made all the Flash games in high school, and that's only like 4 years. So this is longer than that. So there's like a huge cycle of iterating and experimenting that is just going on within one game instead of across a bunch. And it's one of the important things that we did here was early on in development, I put a lot of effort into making sure that everything we knew the game was going to take a while to make because it's gigantic. And so knowing that I could spend, that first COVID year just getting all the systems in place very flexible. And like development wise, that worked out fine because I'm working on it with Edmund McMillan. He has two kids. He had a second kid during COVID. And COVID hit him harder than it hit me for in terms of like productivity stuff, just because he had kids to deal with. So during that first year, I was able to basically focus on just getting all the systems in place and not worrying too much about getting the content done. So we have a bunch of systems in place in Eugenics that are like, I can code an enemy in like 5 minutes if I don't have to do that much like extra stuff. And I can make an ability like a spell or a passive effect very quickly, which is very good for iteration because you're never like locked in. You're like, oh, this thing is in here. It would take 5 minutes to replace it with something else if it doesn't work out. So why not just try something? And so then over the course of development, we try a lot of things, and some of them work, some of them don't. Some of the ones that don't are easy to replace and try something else. And we leave a lot of blanks in the design while working on it because you don't know like what the final game is. You don't know what works or what doesn't until you try it. So if you try to like have a strict design doc just created at the start of development, that never works. You always want to like have some flexibility there. I could give an example recently was that if people have been following the development, we know that there's there's the breeding section of the game where you're breeding all the cats together and trying to get a kitten that has good stats or abilities and stuff. And there's the adventure part of the game. And when the cats are done going on their adventure, they come back to the house to retire. And basically when they're retired, all they can do is breed. And we have a couple of NPCs that they didn't have like a well-defined role. They all had like personality. They were well-defined NPCs character wise, but they didn't have like a gameplay role for like the longest time in development until like earlier this year when we were the whole like breeding adventure loop is in place and we're playing it and we're like, we have too many cats in the house right now. Way too many. You can't keep track of them all. They run out of food too quickly and you have to get rid of them some. And it feels bad to get rid of the cats. So that's a design problem that we encountered that it seems like it should be like a hard thing to solve, but because we didn't have a well-defined role for the NPCs yet, the solution was fairly simple, which was just give the cats to the NPCs. And they can each have a different cat that they want. Like they each have different things that they look for in their cats. So now you have a sub goal of like, oh, this NPC wants cats with mutations. So if I have cats with mutations that I don't want, I can give it to this NPC and get rewards for it. And it basically just that was the solution. Like it just instantly fixed the too many cats issue. It doesn't feel bad to get rid of them anymore because you're giving them to one of these NPCs. And that's just sort of like if we had a design doc at the start that said the NPCs do this and this is what their role is, that solution wouldn't have been available to us at this point in
Right.
development because it would have been locked down early before we knew what their role needed to be. So in this sense, as they're working on the game, we have where it's like, this is a design issue. What do we have over here that's unused? Oh, this thing could work as a solution for it.
Yeah.
And there was like one or two NPCs that also had like a nebulously defined role. Like one of them, Tink, had like the role in his original in the 2014 version of the game was something about pageants, but we don't have pageants in this version of the game. He would just was there as an NPC. It didn't really have like a role. And then when we're working on the stuff for the house, we found a pretty decent thing for him to do, like a decent, like he wants a certain type of cat, and his rewards are all related to breeding stats and extra info on like the cats. Like, are they gay or do they have a lover or are they aggressive?
Yep.
How inbred are they? Like all that type of stuff. We don't want to have that front loaded. So Tink slowly gets you access to those stats.
Nice.
And that works because we didn't have a role for him for a while and we had a problem that we needed to solve. And
Yeah.
they just fit them together at the end when the puzzle's more.
I think a lot of what you just shared though is really interesting, and honestly, it kind of goes back to what you shared in your Q box round, right? In terms of like how to solve problems and such, like or in not only that, but like how we might think about things, like if we overthink things too much, because it's like, look, you just called out to the design document by having it being flexible or not, following it to the T, it actually can solve problems. And it's funny because it sounds counterintuitive, right? If we don't have the design document, let's say, as dialed in as we like to, that could create more problems. And I'm sure in some instances it may, but I think the concept here and what you're sharing is like, but if you're approaching it as it has to be followed to the T rather than like being flexible with these things, you're more likely to probably have an open mind, and an open mind is going to help you solve problems a little bit more. And then when you get to that point, you're talking about how you not only understand the root cause, but like, hey, look at what else is playing, and maybe, and I find this in work I do, and I'm sure a lot of people do. Sometimes we walk away from some things and come back. It's like the answer was
Yeah.
just right in front of you the whole time. And you're like, why didn't I see that before? Right. And
Yeah.
and in terms
Definitely had that.
and in terms of like iteration, I mean, let's just go back real quick to, those Flash games. I think it's really cool and how that process really helped. And as you start explaining everything now, because it's like, hey, I was just banging things out, whatever. We're just getting it done. It's fun. Maybe they weren't the best experiences, but whatever. I was just doing this, like getting it out there. And then when you started talking about the other things, especially when like, and hey, we all face this, life happens. You're saying how Ed is like, he has two kids now, his availability is limited, he can't maybe focus as much as he'd like to, all legitimate reasons that we all can relate to and have. With that process of like, okay, let's focus on what can I get done now. I'm limited on my availability. It's like just me in some instances probably have to tackle some of these things, or at least different. And then you're like, okay, well, let's focus on this. It takes me 5 minutes. Let's bang it out. Boom. So then it's like there's always some form of progression, because I think there's, and you tell me
Yeah.
what you think about this. I think sometimes there's this also psychological component. And I think it goes back to one of your previous answers from the Q box, where if you're just feeling busy but nothing's getting done, it's not fulfilling. It's bringing you down. I mean, it's just ultimately leading to burnout, right? So
Yeah.
even if you're doing little things that might not add up in terms of your timeline and milestones and stuff, but if it's still being productive, I mean, that's going to be a lot more fulfilling and probably reduce potential burnout than making progress or trying to make progress in something that's just taking god awful long time.
Yeah. I definitely will have days where I'm just like, I was supposed to do this thing today, but I'm not like motivated to do much. So I'm just going to like fix bugs or something for the day. As long as I can fix 10, 15 bugs, and I've done something.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a strong believer, and sometimes it's about the motivation. I mean, obviously we have to prioritize some things, but if you're motivated to do something and it still needs to get done, then and if you have the flexibility to deprioritize something, then why not tackle it, right? Because otherwise,
Yeah,
it's more of a struggle, and we want to reduce that struggle.
yeah,
So I'm curious too. Speaking of struggles, I mean, especially with Mugenics, when you're iterating on that, you shared some insight around that too. When you're looking at like making these changes to some of these features and stuff, like you shared earlier, like how do you go about, you know, making sure like, that this is doing that what you're doing is sustainable, especially for the long-term vision, let's say, of the project versus like maybe like short-term experiments in a sense. I mean, maybe experiment's a strong word, but maybe quick solutions is a better way to describe it. But like kind of what's your approach to those things? And is it just a matter of the process of getting things just done and you can correct it later if needed, or is there something else involved?
yeah. Pretty much just get them done and then fix them later.
Okay.
Like
Yep.
if you like, it's that's a simple one because uh, if you get them done, if you put a duct tape solution onto something, and then it's like, oh, that's fine, that works fine, I don't need to change it. You saved yourself a bunch of time. If it doesn't, if it shows up that like you put a duct tape solution something on something and it just like starts falling apart later on, then you can go and take that out, and you have a better idea of like what all the pieces around that are and what the needs of the thing are, and you can make a better solution for it there, like then and there when you need to. And in my experience, it's like maybe like 90-10, where 90% of the time the quick duct tape solution is just going to be fine and it's going to need to be changed. And like 10% of the time, you're going to need to go back and tear it out and put something better in. And just that's just makes sense to just do the duct tape solutions then.
Yeah. No.
90% of the time, it's going to save you time. 10% of the time, it's going to cost you more time. But even in those cases where it costs you more time, you're going to have something better after having seen it all in action than if you try to like predict the future and do the perfect thing right from the start.
Yeah. No.
It's a lot worse. It's a lot worse to spend a bunch of effort making some big complicated thing and have that also not be good enough
Yeah.
and have to tear it out and redo it than to just take out some duct tape thing. So
Yeah. And I
the
think
easier it is to delete is the easier it is to fix.
yeah. No. Well said. And you said something else too that I think is important to always keep in mind is like what I call the what if game, right? Well, what if this
Yeah.
happens, or what if I don't fix this and this? Like, what if? It's like, well, okay. It goes back to what you said before, overthinking things, and sometimes you just got to get in and do it, even if there's that what if. But instead of instead of planning out what that might be, I mean, it could be what, like, I don't know. I know it's game development, like all sorts of things can happen. You can't plan for all of them, and even if you do, like,
Yeah.
exactly. Well,
Yeah.
what you just shared there too, though, brings up some interesting things that I'm curious about too, in terms of like balance, like specifically, like, earlier you're sharing these ideas and how you come across and are flexible with like finding new things with the development, but like essentially being agile with the iteration, the iterative process of it all. But in doing that, how do you also, because it sounds like some of the things you're talking about could lead to some feature creep, right? So and hey, this is probably common with a lot of indies in general anyway. So how do you go about doing that to making sure that that's not happening, especially when, like, let's say for some people out there, resources are limited, meaning not just money but time. So how to reduce that potential while we're still being agile in our iterative process?
Yeah. Well, this is feature creepy game. So that's how we've described it. The game is gigantic. People will see. I mean, people are always like, why is it taking so long in development? Only it's a big game. All right. You will see when it comes out. You will be surprised at how much stuff there is in there, even given the fact that it's taken this long to make. Like you will be like, how did they only spend 5 years making this? Although people are going to be like, why did they spend 15 years making it? Because they didn't notice that the first version was canceled and restarted. But yeah, yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff in the game, and part of that is I made it very easy to make certain types of content. So that type of content we have a lot of, and it's not really feature creep to have 1,000 abilities, like cat abilities, in the game, because those, I mean, it still took a long time to like design and balance all of them, but it wasn't like, you know, from a design of an ability to implementing it, it's like, so that it's not like, that's not where the time comes from. But we do have in in our design spreadsheet, we have a whole tab for DLC ID.
Mm.
So every new thing for like the last year that we've come up with for the game, we're like, oh, this would be cool. We should do this. This would be cool. We just add it to the DLC ideas tab to get it out of the heads and be like, we'll do that for DLC maybe. Everything else is the scope has been locked down for like a year now. We're just trying to finish the everything that's needed to like get the game done. But it's a very useful. It's a simple thing to just have a place to put all the feature creep ideas and be like, we'll do it as a DLC.
Yeah.
Easy enough. We might not. We're almost certainly going to do a DLC, but there's more in this tab than would fit in one or two DLCs. So,
It's so good because it's like you're right. It is so simple, and you know there is a power to lists, as I don't
yeah,
know, weird or cheesy that could sound, but I mean, and you said it so well. It's like, hey, look, it's in there, it's out of our heads now because what happens, right? We're in the moment, we think of this concept, idea, whatever. In some cases, we may dwell on it because or almost get borderline obsessed. But what's happening when that happens? Well, we all know the answer. Work's not getting done. Or is this
yeah,
really going to be a factor in changing it? And what that initial experience is? Probably not. And like you
mhm,
guys are doing, hey, just throw it in the DLC list. We can come back to it later. And then maybe like you go back later, you're like, what were you thinking? This sucks. Like, because
yeah,
that could have very well happened, or it's amazing. Who knows what the end result will be? But at least it keeps you dialed in, focus on, like you said, you had that scope nailed down, and now here, that's it. Everything else goes in and on this list, and we're good to move forward.
yep.
Love it, absolutely love
Simple
it.
tricks.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, see, folks, sometimes it's progress is really in the simplicity of things. It really can be. You know, in light of that too is progress. I want to kind of transfer or transition things a little bit to this concept of sustainability, right? You know, because with indie development, it is challenging. I'm sure you guys can relate to it, you yourself as well. But like with that challenge, how do you ensure a project remains exciting and feasible over a long development cycle? And I think a perfect example of this too is what we're talking about today, mugenics. So how do we
Yeah,
like sustain this momentum, especially over such a long period of time? Because it happens.
yeah. So one of the things is that there's a personal rule, which is that the game should be fun to play from like the start of development. Like in some capacity, you have a character on screen moving around. That should be fun. Like you should be able to boot that like you're 5 minutes into development, you've made a thing move around on screen. You should be able to boot that up and find some fun in that. And then that needs to maintain throughout the whole development. Like obviously, like one platformer level with a single platform in the middle and a character jumping around should be fun. It's not going to be an hour, 2 hours worth of gameplay out of that, but it should be fun. And you're never going to like it's going that fun is still going to be there when you add more stuff to the game. But it's harder if it's not fun in the start, and then you're trying to figure out how to make it fun. And if you try moving ahead on something that isn't fun, it's harder to make it fun than it is to just start with something fun. So that's part of it that keeps you motivated throughout the development. At any point in time, you should be able to boot up the game, play some part of it, and have fun. It took a longer than most games for like Nugenics, as it's a strategy game, and like sort of just having things walk around on screen isn't exactly the most exciting for like those first few months. But I dialed in and made sure that we got combats and like all of the all of the important parts for an adventure done as quickly as possible so that we had something to play, that we could see where the fun was and what to iterate on.
I really like
Yeah, the
that.
question was about sustainability,
No,
right? Yeah,
well, I think, I mean,
yeah,
it's open, right? And the way
yeah,
what I'm taking from this is I I I I know I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the concept of you got to make it fun, but what I'm hearing from this too, in terms of making this sustainable, it goes both ways. Obviously, we think of at face value at the end of the experience, or at the end of this development, especially if it's going to be a commercial product, it's got to be fun for players. But if you're not leading with
yeah,
fun, then like you said, there's going to be all these challenges in development to try to make something fun, and at its core, if it's not, then there's that. And then the other side is for development. I mean, we
yeah,
briefly mentioned burnout and such, but if you're creating an experience that you have difficulty having fun with, then any work associated with that project is going to be feel way more like work than
yeah. No, like,
right. So
if Mutenics wasn't fun, it would have been out 3 years ago.
right.
It would
And
have been done. We would have released it. It would have been fine, maybe, but it would have been like we would have been like, yeah, I just got to get this. We got to dispose the book on this and get it out. But like we, it was fun. Everything we added to the game made it more fun, and that has not slowed down yet. Which is part of why it's taking so long, is because there's no end in sight for how good the game gets. Because every time we add something to it, it's like, oh, this is awesome. The game's better now. It just keeps getting better. Like it went from we need like this tactical strategy thing as like the motivation for breeding, to hey, this tactical strategy stuff is pretty good and engaging on its own, and the more we add to it, the better it's getting. And then it's like, oh, this is something. This is very, very good. This is possibly one of the best tactical strategy games that either of me or Ed has ever played, and most of the people we show it to are seeing it when even just from a few hours of gameplay. They're like, oh yeah, this is there's a lot to this, and like it builds on top of that, and it builds, and then it's like, yeah, we could keep adding stuff to it, and it'll keep getting better.
yeah,
Um,
so it also
yeah,
sounds like too, so part of your iteration process is just simply building off of the fun. And maybe I'm not, maybe this applies to you, but I could see it as if you're creating these games, whoever you are, and you're finding that you're trying to iterate off of that core thing that's either fun or should be fun, and it's not. Maybe that's an indicator of, you know, of something's not in the right way or whatever. But or it's at a point
yeah,
where maybe it's a harder decision you have to make a call on. Whereas if you're building off of the fun and it continues to be more fun, it's probably a great indicator that okay, you've got something, and that could lead towards sustainability from the project point of view, and potentially beyond. Because if those elements and facts, and obviously there's other things that need to be done to validate, of course, like play tests and all those other things, but if that's probably a good indicator that it's going in the right direction, and in all the right directions. Let me ask you this, because you brought something up I thought was kind of interesting that a lot of us probably don't like talking about or thinking about, especially when we're in those moments. You said earlier that if it wasn't fun, we would this thing would have been done three years ago, call it, and move on. But like,
yeah.
if let's say if that really was the case, like, would you, for all the time, for especially when the inception of this was back in, almost a decade,
Yeah.
would you guys still make that call if you found it wasn't fun and it maybe wasn't progressing, at what you would where you would like it to? Do you think you'd still make that call?
What, to release it when it's not fun? No, we would have made it. It would have been fine, but it wouldn't have been like amazing.
Okay. So
Yeah,
it
I
so
definitely mean, like if it's a disaster, it's probably just gonna get canceled. But if it's like it's hard to make it fun and we can squeeze something out of this, then it's you do that, and then you don't want to like put too much extra work into something if it's not giving returns, right?
yeah. Yep.
But
Okay.
yeah,
No, and but
mhm,
I'm glad you called that out, because I think it's important to consider, because there's certain moments and thresholds, and only you as an individual, your team, can make that call. But it gets to a point where it's like, okay, if we put X more resources, time and money into this, are we going to get that return, or is it best to focus on something else, put it out there, finish it? Or sometimes it is, does it even make sense to can the whole project? I mean, there's other factors at play, but I think what we identified from a simple perspective is the fun aspect is probably at least one of the key drivers. There's going to be others too, but no, I'm glad you called that out,
Yeah.
because it's a difficult problem to face, and not an easy one. No one could really answer, right? It's
Yeah.
it's that whole process of kind of making that call yourself, and what makes sense for you or your team. No, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely an important thing. So, you know, I'm in light of all this conversation and what we talked about from with sustainability, like has there been any lessons from like your previously released games, whether it be like Closure, Bomber Nuts, or anything really, that you're trying to apply to current projects, especially from a commercial standpoint or a commercial success, or however you define success? Is there any things that you're trying to learn from that to apply here to kind of maintain the trajectory you guys and the reputation that you've had for all this point, or is it just, hey, we're just doing more of the same of what we like and everything? I mean, you tell me how what maybe that process or what that concept is.
So like there's always like lessons to be learned from the earlier games. Like that was the whole thing I was doing with Flash games was release the thing, learn the lessons, apply to the next thing. Times 50. Closure was the first commercial project I made, which was the first like big thing that I spent multiple years working on. And, I didn't know a lot of what I was doing when I was working on that game. So there were a lot of mistakes that were made, like just having it too hard to add new stuff to the game and or like wrong type of like level editor that made it hard to like iterate on level designs and stuff. And a sort of flimsy technical gimmick that was a little bit too dependent on specific graphics cards and stuff. And that was like I like the game for the first commercial project I made. I'm very proud of it. We made a good game. I replayed it for its 10-year anniversary a couple years ago. And when I was playing through it, I'm like, hey, this is actually still pretty good. I'm having fun with it. I got stuck on one of my own puzzles. Had to look up the solution for one of my own puzzles that I made. But yeah, no, that was, you learn your lessons from that. Bomber Nuts, it was mostly just kind of a side project. That was an attempt to make a multiplayer game because I'd never made one before. And it's a fairly small project. It didn't sell very well, but it was pretty fun for just as a learning thing. But yeah, what was the question?
No, that's all right. No, it was about like, those
Yeah.
experiences of those, commercial games, and how they can maybe help attribute from those learnings, attribute to the sustainability of, projects moving forward, eugenics and even beyond.
Yeah. So it's like a lot of that is just, you get better at stuff as you work on things and you know what worked and what didn't work and whatnot. There were a couple of canceled projects in between, like what was it? Ouroboros. I was working on that with Ed before the end is nigh. And that one got canceled because of the game made you way too motion sick.
Mm.
And that was an unsolvable problem while keeping the game the same. Like you can't that's the setup of the game would make people motion sick. So, and there was no way to like keep the same gimmick of that game and not have it make you motion sick. So we turned that into the end is nigh instead. But Ouroboros had a bunch of, power ups and abilities and stuff that was, Mugenics has a bunch of abilities and stuff. They're different games, but there's some things to learn between the two. There was two of the earlier prototypes of Mugenics where there was like a fighting game version and a real-time strategy version. And, throughout all of that, I had been experimenting with different ways to like define abilities and stuff. So when we actually landed on the tactical strategy version of Mugenics, I had like 4 or 5 different ability systems that I had made previously where I knew what worked and what didn't work about them. and then I was able to land pretty almost immediately on something that was like perfect for this kind of game. Yeah, almost immediately after 5 years of working on related things. But yeah,
Yeah. So it sounds like it just, there's no like magic answer here, folks. It's more of like that understanding, that learning experience, and finding out, what works, what doesn't. And what I like too is it sounds like there's lots of learnings going on, even though some of the games that you listed, and I'm not completely familiar with them, but that they vary too in terms of the
yeah,
design, the mechanics, and other elements. And even if it's that different, there's still so much that can be learned and applied to look at things in a way that it's like, all right, because of this information, because of what we know and what we've been trying and everything else, we're at least that much more confident in, the direction that this project is going in. And also I loved how it's like how Mugenics started from like two different, very different types of games, and then it became pretty clear like, yep, this is where we're going. And I think it's
yeah,
all part of that process, in which can, help us, give us that confidence that we need. Almost in some ways it's a gut feeling, but I think it's more than that, because it's the experience that helps make that a thing.
yeah, yeah. It's more than a gut feeling, but you start there.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, don't just lead with your gut, please.
yeah,
Awesome.
mhm,
Well, I know we're coming on time here, and I mean, we've discussed so much and everything in terms of like, ways that you avoid burnout. That's not only addressing that, but so many other things that you're working towards, which is, that iteration, because that process that you guys go through and everything else. So, in light of this, in light of our conversation of today, like, are there any like tips, suggestions, or even recommendations you have for our listeners today based off of, everything discussed?
yeah. So my advice is literally it's always the same, which is just make a lot of things.
Mm,
Like make and release a lot of things. The release is important too. I didn't get into that here, but it's part of the experience is knowing how to finish something, release it, and handle like feedback and criticism correctly. People collapse under that if they don't know what to expect. I've seen it happen. But just the more things you make, like get your reps in. 2 week projects are great. I like when I say make small things. A lot of people their mind goes to 6 month project. No, 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 no. 2 weeks. Whatever you can do in 2 weeks, cut it off and like just figure out what you can do in 2 weeks. It'll be a lot quicker to figure that out than what you can do in 6 months.
yeah. And not only
Oh
that, I keep seeing this recurring theme, at least recently. It's like, if you're through limitations, you're more likely than not to find more opportunities or more ways to solve problems than if you're giving yourself that much more to work with. I mean, it's something I
yeah,
find applicable across the board in just about anything you do. And that's, I think that's exactly what you're saying, and not directly, of course, but it can relate to that, where it's like, hey, 2 week projects, bang them out. And let me ask you this, because as you were saying this, I was curious, and apologize if I forgot, but Closure was your first commercial success, correct? Or commercial product?
commercial project. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So that's it. It's like, but it was your first commercial project, but you made like what, 50 games before that. They're small,
yeah.
yep, but still. So,
No, but yeah,
and I think that's important, because and you can, whether you agree with me or not, but it was again a big part of probably what made that help with that commercial product, was the fact that you had all those 50 games under your belt, regardless of how good or great they were. That gave you probably everything that you needed to get you to that next point, and really support not only that, but then everything else up to now, it seems.
yeah, for sure. Like that's what I just it's you learn so much about development from the full release cycle of start from a blank canvas, so have something playable, iterate it, finish it, and release it. Like that whole cycle is important, and you're never going to get practice on the finish it and release it part if you don't do that a bunch, because everything needs practice. So the more that you need, like it's a very, very important part of development that a lot of people think that they're just going to wing it. And then that's their thing collapses at that point. I've seen it happen
Yeah.
a lot of times.
And not only
Um,
that, I think it also happens like you have like new startups teams and they could have lots of skills and a history working in games, but I think there's something very different about now if this is the first game that you're working on as a whole, as not just a part of. I would say that your advice would still apply in those cases, and sometimes we don't think of. And it's not to say you have to do it that way, but there's nothing else. But it would just support you.
yeah,
Awesome.
it's
Well,
important.
support. So make a lot of things and release them, guys. All right, just try it. It sounds like it would be fun, anyways.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're coming on time. Can't thank you enough for being here. But Tyler, I mean, if
Thanks for
people
having me.
want to find out more about your projects, about you, what are ways people could connect? Do you have any links you can drop? Please let us know.
Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter. You'll have the link for that, Twitter/Tyler Glaiel. And then you can also wishlist Mugenics on Steam. We post dev blogs there regularly. Those are the easiest ways to reach me.
Awesome. And I know too, and this will be in the show notes as well. Glaiel Games has pretty much all their forms of communication that you seem to regularly. But it sounds like, X. Oh, I hate calling it. That's a first
No,
time
I
I've
just
called
call it Twitter.
I call it Twitter too. I don't know.
I have an extension that puts the Twitter logo back on the website.
Yes, thank you.
And so I never even see the X logo.
Oh, I looked at it and then I said it today, right now, but I always say Twitter. But anyways, Tyler is on Twitter, and great way. And plus, check out Mugenics on Steam. And again, Tyler, thank you so much for being here today and sharing all your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.